time. So let's move on to our first agenda item, which is the Pledge of Allegiance. So if folks watching at home and participating from home, just please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So our second agenda item is public comment, and I see perhaps a few. I see the name Lisa Johnson up on the board.
She is the Assistant Director for Student Support Services.
Gotcha. Okay. So, well, thank you for
New this
joining
year.
us.
Hi, Lisa.
Jim, are you able to ascertain if there are any folks?
I do not see any members from the public present.
All right, so we'll move on to our third agenda item, which is approval and review of the consent agenda. A pretty slim one this time around. We have the minutes from our October meeting. No leaves of absence, no retirements. We do have one resignation, and no nominations of field trips. So I would
Make a motion.
What's that motion, Cindy? You moving to
Yes.
approve? Okay.
Yes.
We have a motion to approve the consent agenda. We have a second by Scott. Any discussion on that motion? Very good. Hearing none. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda as published, please signify by saying aye and raising your hand.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Very good. That passes. So under finance, agenda item 4, we do have a treasurer's report, which is to be posted. I don't know that when I last looked for it that it was up yet.
I have not seen it.
Okay. And I see that we have Director Gordon also on the call, and I'm wondering, Director Gordon, is there anything? I see that there's an action item noted on the agenda, but I'm wondering if you could speak to us a bit further on that, please.
I think that's just the treasurer's report to accept that, and it hasn't been posted yet, so I think you can just table it until next time.
All right, so we will have to table that.
Thank you.
For that, thank you for that. All right, so continuing to move right along, we have our fifth agenda item, which is policies to say none, which will roll us into agenda item 6, which is a policy committee report. So as the representative from this board to the policy committee, we did meet. We had taken a bit of a hiatus, but we met this past week, I guess last week. We reviewed a number of policies, no major changes to any of them. We have some additional language that was recommended by legal counsel to the conflict of interest in hiring policy. That's 4035. So that made its way through the policy committee, and now will have to be circulated through all the different boards. So we will see that in its official form soon. This is more just a heads up. We also had a discussion about curriculum-based field trips. Again, just adding language to this. The specific language that is being proposed for addition to the curriculum-based field trips have to do about inclusion and ensuring that students, regardless of ability, can participate in these field trips. To include the notion that schools ought not to choose to avoid doing field trips out of concern for not being able to include all students. That to do such is tantamount to depriving students of that opportunity. So it's all about adding this inclusionary language, which again, it will make the rounds back to us soon. There was also, we had our annual review of Title I parent involvement. So that is always, it's great to see how that is evolving over time. And although this was not brought in the policy committee, we do have at least one policy that was explicit only to the former Bennington School District. That's policy 6161, which is the Bennington School District animals in the school. And what I would ask is that folks take a look at that over the next month. And then when we come back in December, what I'd like us to do is to potentially take some action on this. And if we, as this new board, since the BSD doesn't exist any longer, if we as this new board want to adopt what is currently 6161 for the whole of the SBU ESD. So that's something else for us to be doing next month. And with that exhausts the policy committee report. But I would ask if there are any members of the board who have any questions about what has been covered in the policy committee.
No, I just have one question, Chris.
Yeah, please, Jeff.
And Jim might be able to comment on this. I believe there was a state directive about suspension expulsions in schools that children under the age of 8 were not allowed to be expelled or suspended this year. So I'm not sure if we need to address that in policy because that affects our children, or if that is just a sidebar that we're taking care of at the administrative level.
Well, yeah, at the administrative level, all administrators have been passed on that information and also advised by the school's attorney that from the state that eight or under cannot be suspended.
Okay.
Unless they are, an
Behavior
immediate danger to themselves or others.
And Dr. Abbott, just for those of you who can't see it, Dr. Abbott just noted in the chat that it is law. So it is, it's built into statute.
Yeah.
And Dr. Abbott, please feel free to weigh in, or Superintendent Culkeen. Even in cases of risk of imminent harm to themselves or others, even then, it's not a disciplinary.
Not an automatic.
Yeah.
No.
Well, not that it's not automatic, but even then, it's not a disciplinary piece. So would that even constitute a suspension or an expulsion if it came down to physical safety?
We would still have to record it as such,
Okay.
but our intent is, either an alternative placement to keep their education going forward, but
Right.
they should not be deprived of an education.
Right. Dr. Abbott, is there anything else that we should be aware of with regard to that?
So basically, we reviewed the act with all the principals at the principals meeting and had a rich discussion around, alternatives and supports for children to be safe at school. So I think it's a positive, and I think our principals are really looking for ways to support our learners, and some of our new behavioral supports that we have added this year have really come in handy when we are looking at ways to try to support learners to be safe at school.
Great, thank you. And Dick, you were also at the policy committee meeting. Is there anything that I missed or anything we should talk more about?
Well, it probably should be noted that Arlington has accepted the basic SVSU policy manual, and they're working out others that might be specific to them or specialized policies, but they're on board.
Great. All right, very good. Any other questions about the policy committee report? Okay, so just one more plug to please take a look at 6161 before next month. It'll be in the packet next month, and it's not a very taxing policy to read through, but take a look at it because I think we should wrap it up. Okay, so that brings us to agenda item 7, the principal's report, and we have Principal Todd Phillips, who is our virtual host for the evening. So Principal Phillips, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So first of all, I just want to thank Superintendent Culkeen and the school board members for inviting me tonight. I just have a few things to say, but first of all, I just want to say how proud I am of our students, staff, and families over the last couple years. They've been so resilient and flexible. Even last Thursday and Friday when we had to close school because of the water issues, we found out first thing on Thursday morning, and by 9 o'clock, we had all of our students basically picked up by their parents. We had about 11 students left that we had to bus home. Of course, we called to make sure that someone was going to be there. But the cooperation of our staff, students, and families, just, with that situation, it was truly amazing. But, each and every day, our staff and our students, wearing masks still. Up to this point, there's nobody fighting this. I mean, we're just so lucky. So I just want to say, how proud I am of our students and staff and families. We've had a great beginning of the school year. Covering classrooms at times has been a little bit tough. So I want to thank our paraprofessionals, because at the last minute, a parent may come to me and say, my child's preschool is now closed. I have to go and pick them up. And, there's situations at the last minute that we have to find coverage, and we couldn't do it without our paraprofessionals. We've welcomed 2 new staff members to Pownell School this year. Our assistant principal, Sarah Case. She's working with Pownell and Shasberry. And her schedule is Mondays, Wednesdays, every other Friday at Pownell, and Tuesdays, Thursdays, and the opposite Fridays at Shasberry. and things have been working out very well with Sarah. She's working with our grade level teams and professional learning communities. She's a really nice presence in our school at this point. We also welcomed our school community liaison. We call him Mr. J, Mark DiGello. He's been a great addition to our staff. We had virtual open houses this year because we couldn't meet in person in all classrooms. Classroom teachers, set up a virtual open house for their families to view. Our PBIS program is going strong. PBIS, of course, is that positive behavior intervention supports. Pownell's a safe, respectful, responsible community. And with that, I always say at the beginning of the year, we have to flood our students. We have to flood them with the positive praise and the pause. And they really buy into the program. And then as the year goes on, we kind of wean that off some so they do things naturally. But this time, this first trimester, we really tried to flood them, and they love to collect those paws, and they cash them in for little trinkets. And even some of our students want to eat lunch with me, and that's 100 paws. So I mean, to cash in 100 paws to eat with me, I'm like, don't you want a couple pencils instead? But no, they want to eat with me. Let's see what else. The fall benchmarking has been complete, and on October 29th, all of our classroom teachers in the afternoon, as well as our special education teachers and our interventionists, they met as teams, developed SMART goals from the data from our MTSS database. So they have goals for ELA, math, writing, and social emotional to make sure that we're progress monitoring our students' academic and social and emotional goals throughout the year. We've had a couple fun activities. So the AOE and the Agency of Transportation, they have a Name the Plow contest. And that was sent out by Superintendent Colkeen and Secretary Daniel French. And our school came up with 14 names. Each classroom came up with a name. And as a school, we had to vote on those. So I'm going to run down just real quickly the 14 because they are cute. Cloud Storm, COVID-19, S56, Black Panther, Powerful Panther, Maple, Princess, Snowstorm, Pownell Panther Pride, Pownell Powerhouse, Plow Bunyan, Snow Angel, Ice Blaster, and Mr. Pushy. And the winner from Pownell School, Mr. Pushy. So the AOT will visit the schools that participated in this on November 17th. The plow will come to the school with the name of, for our school, it'll have Mr. Pushy on it. And the kids will be able to see the plow with our school name on it, Mr. Pushy, but I guess there's 250 full-size plows, and the agency, they wanted to name each truck. And Secretary of Education Dan French quoted, "This is a great way for students to learn about the important work that goes into making Vermont a wonderful place to live, work, and play in the winter months. I encourage Vermont schools to participate in the Name the Plow program." So of course we did, and Mr. Pushy is going to be out there pushing snow. I think that's all. Oh, I had one other thing. The Pownell Valley Fire and Rescue came on the 29th. They visited our building, so we had an outside field trip, and they came with the fire trucks and emergency vehicles. So it was a fire safety session with our students and our grade levels. It was about 15 or 20 minutes for each classroom. And I think that's about it.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Did I hear you say S56?
Yes.
We
couldn't understand where that came from.
Oh,
So
okay.
even the classroom teacher tried to look that up, couldn't figure out where that came from. So it might be like a video game or something, I'm assuming, but
Okay.
who knows? but, they wanted to make sure that all names submitted would be appropriate. So we kind of looked up all of the names and they all were, but I thought Mr. Pushy was pretty cute.
Thank you, Todd.
Yeah.
Who is Mr. Pushy? Were they naming after?
I don't think I just think
Okay.
because, a plow pushes snow.
Sure.
I think that's where that came from.
I'm sure it's not after the principal. if
I was
that's what
gonna,
you're
that was
alluding
gonna
to.
be my next question.
Great. Any other questions for Principal Phillips?
Good job, Todd.
Thanks. And I do really, I'm just so proud of the students, staff and families in Powell. So thank you so much. And I appreciate the invitation tonight.
Thank you very much. All right. Anything else for our principal before we move on to the next agenda item? Okay, great. So moving on to the next agenda item, that puts Superintendent Culkeen next.
Thank you,
please.
Todd, and to the rest of the board members, we're going to bring this back. We miss our principals. We were all business for a long time as we dealt with COVID. And so until we'll have virtual hosts each month that will tell you the board about what's going on at their schools. And thank you, Todd, for being willing to go first. Couple of things I want to put on your radar with the budget process beginning. One of the things that we've been looking at is class size. And last week I received the kindergarten projected numbers. And I have to tell you that I'm a little concerned that some of the numbers are high, particularly Monument. But it's still early to go into like a full panic mode or to decide that we have to change anything. Because what I don't have yet for these numbers is like what private school attendance will be. So that would get subtracted out of those numbers. But I can tell you right now, Bank Elementary anticipated enrollment is 49, Molly Stark 58, Monument 26, Pownell 19, Shaftesbury 26, Woodford 2. So it's too early to tell the impact, but I am concerned enough that I wanted to bring it to your attention. What I am trying to avoid is the redrawing of any attendance zones and the panic that may ensue if we have to do that. But Monument typically has one kindergarten, 26 obviously is too big. It also tends to be one of our schools that has more draw out for private enrollment. So we will have to wait and see yet. Too early, but I wanted it, in your awareness. Any question on that? I think, did you have something?
You answered it already.
Okay. I was asked by the chair earlier today, what's the status of the property across the street from Molly Stack? And that was the town of Bennington's garage and salt shed. So in meeting with our director of finance and operations, we are still pursuing the transfer of this property. There's also somebody else who wants part of this property, the Bennington Rural Fire Department. So our understanding is that they have retained engineering services to see the addition that they want to put on their building. So like what they would, how much land they would need to meet setback requirements and all that, and then what we would see. But we're still pursuing that with the town of Bennington, and they're still, amenable to working with us for that. But nothing is finalized yet on that. But it's moving, but it's moving at a slow pace. So transportation, that earlier last month I had to cancel school for a day because we didn't have enough bus drivers. And it's not really related to the national bus driver shortage that has been in the news, but there certainly isn't, just like there's not a lot of substitute teachers sitting on the shelf, there's not a lot of substitute bus drivers. So when we had a number of bus drivers test positive for COVID, so they needed to quarantine, and then a lot of our substitutes drivers all came from the same family, and with the death in their family, there wasn't a lot of choice. Yesterday, I had to cancel transportation for pre-K students and On Point, which was one bus, but there was no driver available yesterday. So what was unfortunate is the previous week, as a response to what happened when we shut down that day, I asked Mike Gardner from Do For Transportation to come up with a plan to make sure that that does not happen again, right? So really we're stacking, the plan came back to stack bus routes for lack of a better term. And there's 3 levels of this happens depending on how many drivers are out. And it's going to reach some point that we would still have to close. And the number I've been told, if there was like more than 5 drivers out without substitutes, we could be in that same position. Or I have to make the decision that I'm going to open school and just say that transportation is not available. If I do that, I run the risk of not hitting the 50% attendance mark that we have to have in school for the day to count. So if I don't have 50% of the students there, the day wouldn't count. And that could be a problem then trying to add a day onto the end, because if the staff reports, then that's a work day for them. So, but I do want to thank Mike Gardner and Elaine Hewitt, Renee Gordon, and Amanda Weber from the SU, who have worked to put this 3-tiered plan together. So why didn't it work yesterday? Because we just met last week to roll it out, and I didn't have the degree of confidence, and neither did Mike Gardner, that it would, that we had told enough people about how this backup driver plan would work, which really means that you're doubling up some routes. And we'd have to make notification, let people know. I'll give you an example. Say your bus pickup time. What people maybe not realize, because the buses by and large usually run pretty smooth, is there's a half-hour window. People should understand the bus could show up 15 minutes early and it could show up 15 minutes late, and it's still within the window that is a normal expectation. It rarely happens, but it could. And what Do For Transportation is telling us, even with double stacking some routes, and they've identified which routes that would be because of, there's extra capacity on a bus that they could pick up these other routes. They may be early at some spots and late at others. And I made the decision that I don't think we had adequately informed our parents how that might work. So luckily it was one bus for one day. The initial plan, the initial ask from the bus company was it was going to be all week, and I kind of looked at that was not acceptable. And to their credit, they went back to the drawing board and worked and were able to provide transportation for the rest of the week. So it's just another one of our challenges, but I think we have a solution to make sure it doesn't happen again. And the other thing that I was trying to avoid is picking and choosing what runs would work and what's, like, for me to say, these 5 bus routes will not run today, everybody else will. And if you're on those 5 routes, you got to get yourself to school. The whole equity of that, especially when you're trying to make an announcement the night before or even that morning. So that's your update on transportation.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
If a normal bus carries 47 students, are we up to full capacity on the buses now, or are we still limited because of space?
No, there's no limits because of COVID on buses anymore. And believe it or not, Dick, by the Vermont Board of Health and AOE, bus riding is considered an outside activity, and contact tracing does not involve buses.
Thank you.
All right. Speaking of school cancellations, Principal Powell mentioned this earlier, and from my emails, I had to close school 2 days last week. I really was impressed with the Powell community. Toughest thing to do is cancel school when buses are already en route and parents are already en route and parents are driving to school, and Todd is greeting them and staff are greeting them in the driveway, tell them to turn around and take your child home. Simplest terms, it's, there was no pressure in the water system, so you're not flushing toilets, you don't have bathrooms, the kitchen's not operating. On Thursday afternoon, I was told that it was repaired. It was repaired, but then it repaired, but said the part needed to be replaced. but it should get you through. And it failed again on Thursday afternoon. I want to thank, Kevin Davis from Pownell Elementary School for his diligence in making sure that in dealing with the contractors that he was dealing with. The part was found in Rutland and it was delivered Friday morning and originally wasn't going to be installed to Saturday, but the repair was actually done before the end of the day, Friday. And so, that took a lot of effort to get, because I am told the part was quite old. So when I hear that, I panic that maybe a replacement isn't even available, but it's done and operating. But again, I want to go back. I can't say enough to the staff of Pownell Elementary, the families of Pownell Elementary, and the bus drivers. We had one of the bus drivers actually works there, so they were on standby, and the second bus driver, because we weren't really sure how many buses we were going to need, because it was told up to possibly 100 students at Pownell ride buses. So parents were turned back with their children. Buses were already en route, so those students got off the buses, went to their classrooms while phone calls were made. And as you heard the principal say, only 11 students required a bus ride home after that happened. So that's, I thank everybody for their understanding. And we certainly didn't, anticipate it in those. When you get a phone call like that, it's really like, what now? It's another reason. So one of the questions I asked about, do they need to make that day up? And those days up, it's too early to tell. If you remember, we schedule 180 student days. Vermont requires 175 student days. So we'll wait and see how many snow days we have. Where will that push us out in June? It's possible if we end up having a lot of snow days, I could apply for a waiver, but I can't even apply for a waiver until February. So again, too early to tell whether we'll do it. They're not alone. If Woodford, if you remember, we had to cancel a day of school at Woodford this year because of septic system issue, and it's happened before. I had to close 2 years ago the middle school for a heating issue. We didn't add that day on for them because everybody else was in school that day, and again, it becomes a busing issue. The buses ran that day. The bus company made their obligation under the contract for running buses. If I make somebody add a day on, I'm either going to have an additional transportation charge or no transportation. So if we get the minimum required days in, then we're probably good the way it is, but we'll wait and see, and hopefully we won't have too many more problems there. COVID, the impact in it, I don't know, what are we in 19, 20 months right now? I can't say enough for your school nurses. I can't say enough for our COVID-19 coordinator, Ashley Walker, as they navigate this for us, while they do, they have to do contact tracing and then quarantine, and families are having a tough time understanding that guidance. They want their child in school. I get it. We're following Agency of Education and Department of Public Health guidance, and we're trying to get out of that with, you've heard the term test to stay. We hope to have that up and running after Thanksgiving. Our nurses are going through training on what that will be like right now. We have gotten our we've gotten our waivers that we can be part of the reporting process, or our nurses can be part of the reporting process. So families will need to sign up for the testing program prior to there being a case of COVID. They can't sign up at the moment. If a family does not sign up for test to stay, their child is a close contact to a school case and they will need to quarantine. This is all about trying to eliminate quarantine. We're going to have our public information coordinator work with our nurses. We're going to try and get, that's why we're shooting for a target of after the Monday after Thanksgiving, so that we take some time to get this information out to families of how this has worked. The program is only for those that the contact was from school exposure. And the program is only for those that are unvaccinated. Because remember, if you're vaccinated, you don't need to quarantine. Though if you're showing symptoms, you're sick and you still need to stay home. So We do not have the kits yet for test to stay. Like I said, our nurses are going through the training. They will be here. When this all started, you were getting like almost daily emails from me about case counts and stuff like that, which I no longer do because, you know, the numbers are daily. I'm sitting here, my phone is going off with what school is the contact tracing going on right now with Bennington Elementary right now has some that will be quarantined tomorrow. Notifications are going out right now. And I know that I have a case at the high school today, and it just goes on. So cases to date, there's been 13 at Bennington Elementary, 9 at Molly Stack, 5 at Monument, 7 at Pownell, 8 at Shasberg, 0 in Woodford, and 0 in early education. And those are positive cases. And then each positive case could have 0 needing to quarantine to a whole class needing to quarantine, depending on following the guidance, you know, were they were they not more than 3 feet apart? How long was that exposure? Were they, you know, well, in elementary, they haven't been vaccinated yet, so, or haven't been fully vaccinated yet. That's just starting. So it's, I'm hoping it's going to help us turn the corner and reduce the workload that our nurses are doing with all the contact tracing, and also allow more students to remain in school. All right. And then is Renee still here? So I mean, Renee, rather than me read the report that you sent me, if you're here. So one of the things that the SU board approved is the hiring of a project manager for the building improvements with ESSA funds. And so we contracted with Centerline Architects, and they're going to start the building tour next week, correct, Renee?
Yes, Monday morning they start. Yep.
Yeah, because as I explained to the SU board, your director of finance and operation has so much on her plate, and even though she's very knowledgeable, she's not, you know, does not have the construction background, though she does have some that a project manager would have, who really protects the taxpayers' interests, the school board's interests, to work directly with that contractor. So Renee, who'd we hire and when do they start and what are they doing?
So Centerline Architects actually was able to get a retired project manager from Williams College who had been there for a couple of decades to come work for them specifically for this role. Michael Briggs, who is very well equipped to be able to do this work for us. As I've explained to many of our facilities folks and administrators, he's kind of soup to nuts, right? Like he can evaluate the buildings, you know, with administrators, see what needs to be done, and then develop that and put things out to bid and then see everything through the construction process as well. We also have quite a few hurdles that we have to get over that the agency has put in place to be able to spend this money for these projects. So we have to do concept approval, we have to do historic preservation confirmations. And then once we get through those and have some design, then of course we have to have overall project approval and then put it out to bid and then get it built. So I've connected, I think, with just about all of our administrators and or the facilities folks in the buildings. So Woodford, he'll be there Monday morning at 7 to meet with Melissa and Jeff Johnson, and then he'll be at the middle school at 1 o'clock that afternoon. Tuesday next week, he's hitting Monument, Pownell, and Bennell. Then Thursday, Shaftesbury, the high school campus, so all the buildings there. And then in the afternoon, we'll be at Molly Stark. And then the following Monday, he'll be up in Arlington at Fisher and Arlington Memorial High School. And I'm hoping, so we now have a standing Wednesday morning meeting just to kind of touch base to see what's going on. But right after that, the Agency of Education has a coffee and conversation session where all of us can kind of get together and they kind of roll out new information that they've gotten from the U.S. Department of Ed and how they're interpreting that information. Hopefully tomorrow that they're going to be sharing with us a new initiative that they're rolling out for a facilities inventory that they've told us that they're going to have to they want it turned around very quickly. So just one more thing that we've got to do and get it done in probably a very short amount of time. So I'm hoping that if they give us the details for that, as he's going around these buildings, hopefully he'll be able to kind of check those items off that they're looking to have on that inventory as well. And then although they haven't said it yet, I suspect that this might have something to do with a slow movement towards possibly the state reinitiating the state construction fund, because we know we all have aging school buildings.
And our contract, he's also reached out to a lot of the contractors and vendors that have done work in our buildings recently, trying to assemble whatever plans may be out there that could help assist for this.
Yeah.
Looks like Scott has a question.
Yeah, I'm going back a long way, or what feels like forever ago, when we were formed as a new board overseeing elementary schools in the region, but also elementary schools, a group of elementary schools for the town, or by town, in this case, the town of Bennington. And all along, I've kind of kept in the back of my mind the volume of money that we are potentially spending on buildings that are never going to be, they've aged out. Much of which has passed their useful life. And so I don't know the step. I'm throwing it out there rather publicly, that should, I appreciate the thoughts that are going into spending money on buildings that we currently have and that are currently standing. But I also, I challenge ourselves to look at every option. And if that means either regional or town-wide schools, or something that's more state-of-the-art for learning today, as opposed to what learning was in 1950, we need to be thinking about that as a board and as a region. And in fact, the discussion about spending money on Spinelli Field, many people in that process challenged us to be thinking about what is the bigger picture plan, what is the strategy, what are all the things that we need to be spending money on. And so if they've asked us for it, then this is an opportunity for us to make something happen, or at least enter into a discussion. So I don't know where that goes. I don't know where the statement goes as a board. What do we do? But we've all walked around the schools, and there's counseling taking place in former broom closets. And that's not something that I'm necessarily proud of. And I think it's something that needs to be addressed.
Scott, I mean, this is Chris. I would agree with that assessment for sure, in terms of it being a larger need. I mean, we are still up against some of the legal restrictions of closing schools that came about as a result of the formation of the board. Are we done with that? I see you're shaking your head. Are we past that?
No, I'm not. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. Well, I'm not suggesting let's close Pownell and Woodford and make a regional school.
Right. No. Yeah.
What the question I'm saying is should we be looking at being innovative as a board and saying, you know what, the Bennington, perhaps it's just Bennington. I don't know. I'm not gonna signal anybody out, but I mean, it's worth having a conversation. Is a more regional elementary school a way to look for the town? Perhaps Pownell, Shaftesbury, Woodford, they all still exist, but there's still what, 4 buildings in Bennington?
Yeah, I think for sure. I mean, one of the things that Director Gordon pointed out was the hopeful return of some state funding to help with building projects like that for schools. I think that's going to be a huge part of whatever plan we as a board come up with. One of the lessons that might be drawn from Spinelli, I know that there are a few in the way that vote turned out, is what is the appetite for members of our community to be spending on capital improvements for schools. I know there were a lot of elements to Spinelli, the environmental concern being one of them, and it's, at least from my perspective, hard to parse out what no votes were voted in such a way because of environmental concerns versus how many no votes because people don't want to spend the money. I think it's a big conversation. I think it's one that we definitely should be having. So please don't hear any of this as me saying, no, that's a
No,
bad idea.
I appreciate the dialogue, and perhaps I shouldn't have even thrown out Spinelli because that's a different, it doesn't change that we as a board should be thinking toward innovation and not necessarily doing things the same way year over year because
So
Right.
there, a
And
couple of different things. The ESSER funds would never let us build a new building, right, Renee? So that would not be authorized. So this isn't, but the bigger discussion that I hear from Scott, and I'm aware of studies that we may need to hire an architectural firm if this is something, the first step would be to authorize somebody who would come in and do a study and look at all your buildings. What's the capacity of them? And not what we think the capacity was based on what they were when they're built, but how education happens today and what can meet current codes if we start, because there's a percentage, once we start spending money in a building, that then we have to bring that building up to code, the whole entire building. So in that case, and I'm going to get to an example of that in a few minutes, in that case, it may not be worth doing anything with that building. So then what is that, if we think regionally, because of this consolidation, like what does it look like? Where was an optimum place to place a building? How big should that building be? Downstairs in this building, there's some discarded studies from particularly Bennington. It was right before I was here that there was a study done about replacing or adding on to or completely rebuilding like all of their buildings. I'm sure it's an outdated study now because of changes, but you've heard me, Renee heard me say it again today. When are we gonna propose an elevator for Bennington Elementary School, which has a second floor that is not accessible?
What's
And
it
we're-
gonna
and
cost?
we
I mean, that's the
continue to
thing.
use it.
Yeah, we're talking about spending tremendous amounts of money and it's still not right.
Yeah. And even some of our buildings that we think are in pretty good standing would pale in comparison to like what a new building with, particularly around accessibility. So I think it's a great point that we can take and study further. It could be that you decide you want to appoint a building study committee. That may be who's got a real interest in that. And then, I just threw out one possibility that, how much does it cost to have someone come, a firm come in and do an assessment of what we have and what we should need. That might be a step, but the study committee may think of something else that they want to do. Just because that's how Spinelli Field did. Spinelli Field did a Spinelli Field ad hoc committee, meaning that the committee went away once the project, was completed. So maybe you do an ad hoc committee to study all your elementary buildings. I think it's got to hand up.
Yeah, Jeff, please go ahead.
So it's the same thing, I think, just following up on Scott, when we did the Act 46 merger, one of the things we threw out as a benefit of this merger to the taxpayers of the community was that making a STEM stool. And we've talked about it now a couple of times, Jim's brought up in meetings, but yet here we sit with no forward thinking on, what could this look like?
Mhm.
And we're looking at 3 years now, I think, since we're doing that. So at what point do we owe it to the taxpayers to kind of start moving on these things? And I was going to piggyback what Jim was saying about Bennell. I mean, that's an inaccessible school. If you have a person in a wheelchair, you move an entire classroom so that kid can't go upstairs.
And that's what we've had to do.
Yeah, which I don't think is fair for anybody in that school.
No.
Yeah, Dick, please.
I just want to contribute that my experience has been in designing project management and engineering areas. And I think the facilities committee was designed to take a look at what the building needs are throughout the district. We haven't really followed through with the facilities committee. I think it's a committee that anyone on it would be interested to have input. I think that it would be helpful in the designs that go forward. And I think we don't want to let that go into hibernation some of what the public would want might be represented by those people on the facilities committee. And if nothing else, we can contribute some ideas. And as a second note, which isn't necessarily related, I just want to pass on kudos to Jim and Renee and Kate and a ton of other people that work in the central office without notice, that they're facing a number of issues that are critical in how we go forward. And then we added COVID on top of it. And I just wanted to say that I think they're doing an excellent job in addressing the day-to-day disasters that seem to be happening. And so thank you to all of those people.
Yeah, I mean, and that, I think that last bit in particular, Dick, can't be said enough. And I think it's because dealing with COVID and first figuring out what emergency remote learning was going to look like, at the beginning of this thing, and then how to manage last year, what that's going to look like. And now, I mean, we say we're returning to normal, but this still doesn't feel very normal to me. So it's also an acknowledgement of like, what is the bandwidth that anyone at central office has for anything above simply keeping the trains running at this point. And that is a terrible mixed metaphor, the bandwidth for keeping the trains running on time. But anyway.
I'll just simply say, when the time is right, it's something I would love to be involved
Great.
with.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And for me, from my perspective anyway, it is a matter of when the time is right. None of the needs that have been brought up tonight are frivolous. Like they are all are legitimate needs and responsibilities of this board to be looking at. But these have been trying times for sure. So I certainly look forward to being able
No
to get
question,
back to-
Chris, no question. And I'm not disputing what you're saying. And again, the time is right, but you do listen to VPR, and there are several districts using this moment to be bold.
Okay, great.
We need to be talking about the ways that my perspective.
No, for sure. Thank you, Scott. No, and it's important. So let's keep talking about it for sure. Thank you.
A few of the items in my report, speaking of old buildings, you may know that the SU authorized the signing of a letter of intent to look for a replacement for this building. It's not a contract, it's a letter of intent. A lot of hurdles that have to be overcome to see whether we're going to move into the building known as the Bennington Brush Building. Cost being per square foot being one of them. But why do I bring it up tonight? This board owns this building, whether you know it or not. And so what happens to this building, other than it gets mothballed, for lack of a better term? We did have a study done of this building. To bring this building completely up to code and use both floors of this building was approaching $3.5 million. And no one could see spending $3.5 million on this building. The cheapest option was a little under $1 million, and that would only make the first floor usable. We'd have to abandon the bottom floor, which then would not be enough square footage for our operations. So that's why we're here. So I again mentioned that that's something we need to keep in mind. And the last thing the community needs is another empty building sitting unused. You attempt to sell this building, if we can go over those hurdles to sell, to move. My understanding is there's restrictions on a lot of this land out behind the building. That at one point in time, the federal government made a payment to the school district to maintain open land in perpetuity, and that's part of that land. I don't know how much of it is, but it could impact, trying to sell it, but using it in a building that you're going to put if you wanted to put students in here for, say, an alternative program, the cost potentially could even escalate, because the life protection requirements for a school building is very different than what's in an office building. So it's just something that you should be aware of. And the last thing I wanted to talk about, we're in budget season. The principals submitted their first draft of their budget to Director of Finance Renee Gordon. She has met with 2 of your principals to date on their first draft of their budget, and that will continue. But, you should all be aware that as we get into December, there will be the necessity to start scheduling budget meetings, because as Director Gordon told me today, she was informed by the town clerk that by virtue of this year's calendar, it will be the earliest that we have to warn our budget this year. So you're going to have your budgets all completed by January 20th, Renee, is that what I'm hearing?
The 30 to 40 day window is January 20th to January 30th. So that's when we have to have everything warned and posted.
So that's pretty early. So the next 2.5 months are going to be busy. That's my report. Any questions that you may have for me?
So you have a few. The water system in Pownell,
Yeah.
is that a larger issue to be dealt with, or does this repair, in your view, does this?
In my view, repairs, it's an electrical control box that builds the pressure in the tanks that adds pressure to the water system so that everything goes through.
Okay.
So yeah, I don't think that it's a catastrophic failure of the water system.
Okay.
Yeah, it was an old controller that needed to be replaced.
Okay, thank you. And then when you were discussing the test to stay process and how we're preparing for that, you mentioned waivers.
Yeah.
What are those waivers?
We had to, I think it's a liability. Again, it's one of those acronyms that it's called the CLIA waiver. We have one for the Union Elementary District and one for the MAU District. I think it's to allow our nurses to continue to do it. So I don't know exactly, as far as I just know it's a step that we had to apply for the waiver, and then there's a small testing fee that we have to pay for the certification fee, like $180 for each school district. So
Okay,
that's where we are on that right now.
great, thank you for that. Any other questions for our superintendent? Okay, great. Well, thank you for that. So moving on to the chair report. So one of the things that we had discussed, we didn't take any action with this in the budget committee, or in the policy committee rather. But in an upcoming policy committee meeting, we'll be discussing policy 5090, which is interrogation or searches of students by law enforcement or other agencies. And although it's not exact, it does sort of dovetail into something that we mentioned month before last at this board, which was sort of us as a board taking a look at how school resource officers, SROs, are used, how some of the functions of SROs are being fulfilled by town police officers who might not have that special SRO training, and just acknowledging that, sort of public view, sort of the world in which we live may have shifted a little bit in I think it's been 4.5 to maybe 5 years when we first started the SRO conversation. And so what I'd like to do is to use between now and next month is for us to do some outreach to not only our school communities, but also to other stakeholders in the community, and ask them to either contact the board through correspondence to the board, which is governed by policy, or use public comments to share their thoughts. Because one, a tremendous amount of money is allocated for SROs, and we're, as Superintendent Kalkita said, we're moving into budget season. Two, the way that we got here for our SVU ESD having SROs began with a non-binding referendum on a ballot of Bennington voters asking, hey, what do you think of school resource officers in our buildings? And that sort of got the ball rolling here. And also we have the reality that even though money is allocated for all of our schools, SROs are only present in some of our schools. And so I think it bears us discussing, because it is such a high ticket item and potentially a really sort of a charged thing for us to be talking about with lots of different points of view. So again, what I'd like to do is to do some specific outreach to our community members over the next few weeks and have that be a large part of our next meeting. Could that also turn into maybe an extra meeting of this board simply to hear more public comment? I mean, possibly. But I at least want to start with using our December meeting to gather some of that information so that we can have a more informed approach when it comes to talking about that specific line item. So there's that. And other than that, just want to continue to reiterate just thanks to everyone within this school system who is working so hard and making all of this work. The steps we're making towards test to stay, I think, is huge, and it also underscores the responsibility that community members have for making test to stay work. Test to stay is not just, hey, if one kid is sick, everyone gets tested and we all get to stay. Like, no, you still need to exercise caution when you're outside of school, and you should take advantage now of the new FDA approval for your children 5 and up to be vaccinated, because that's how you get to access this test to stay, is to get your kids vaccinated. So although the board has never come out with a formal position on vaccination, I'm saying as one board member, get your kids vaccinated, because that's how we're going to move into full normalcy around this. So that exhausts the chair's report.
The superintendent, go back to 2 items that I didn't flip the page over.
Happily, yes, please.
I just wanted to, we were waiting for the Vermont Principals Association to release their winter sports guidance, as we were going to then use that guidance to reopen our buildings to outside groups, like Maya Basketball uses our buildings. So we have that guidance. So we are going to start reopening our buildings. Our gymnasiums usually is the part that we're opening to outside groups. They have to follow the Vermont Principals Association VPA guidance, which means players have to wear masks, spectators have to wear masks. And that's one more step toward returning to normalcy. And I'm informed the waiver allows us to operate like a lab for the testing. So it's not just that we're doing the testing, that we can operate. Thank you, Ashley Walker, watching from home.
Nice. And thank you, Ashley Walker, watching from home.
Yeah.
That's it. Okay, great. Thank you. So any questions about that addendum report from the superintendent? Okay, hearing none. So that brings us to our agenda item 10, the last one, the FYI. There's the student enrollment that was posted for October, and I didn't see the November as of this afternoon. And then the budget status report, which is also there. So that's it. That was a quick meeting, so that was good. That's always nice when we can efficiently move through our business. So if there are no more questions, I would entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you.
And happy Veterans Day to all our veterans who were watching. Thank you for your service, and we'll be thinking of you all on Thursday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we have a first and a second. Any discussion about the motion to adjourn?
No.
Hearing none, all those in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye and raising your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes. We are adjourned. Thank you.